Over 30 students lost their lives in this incident that happened right before Christmas. This is why you should be careful who you let your children take gifts from. Here's what happened. Every December, the town of Ebu danced with joy. The streets became alive with colors, laughter, and music. Young men who had left for the big city came back home with shiny cars and big smiles. They wore clothes that glittered like the morning sun and brought gifts that made everyone happy. Everywhere you looked, people were singing, clapping, and sharing stories. In this town was a man named Nonso. Nonso didn't usually join the fun. He stood by the corner, his heart heavy like a stone. Nonso was handsome, his face smooth like river stones, and he came from a respected family. But he was poor, and poverty wrapped him like a tight chain. While others drove big cars and threw money in the air, Nonso walked barefoot and watched. His rich friends laughed loudly, their voices bouncing like drums in his ears. Nonso, come and join us, they teased, waving money in his face. He forced a smile, but inside he was boiling. At night, Nonso sat in his small room, staring at the dark ceiling. His fists were clenched, and his eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. This shame is too much, he muttered. Every year, they come back richer, and I stay the same. No more. Next Christmas, they will look at me and bow. No matter what it takes, I'll be rich. Nonso's heart burned with a new fire, and his words hung in the air like a dark promise. Little did he know the path he was about to take would shake the town and leave a trail of tears. Nonso heard about the chairman from the whispers of the town. The chairman can make you rich, people said, but his help comes at a price. Everyone feared him. His mansion sat on a lonely hill, surrounded by tall trees that swayed like ghosts in the wind. At night, the house glowed with a strange, cold light. Nonso, desperate and tired of his shame, decided to go. What do I have to lose? He muttered as he climbed the hill. The path was silent, except for the sound of his footsteps on the dry leaves. When he reached the chairman's house, the door creaked open on its own, as if inviting him in. Inside, the chairman sat in a large chair, his face hidden in the dim light. His voice was deep, like the rumble of a distant earthquake. "What do you want?" the chairman asked, his words slow and sharp. "I want to be rich," Nonso said, his voice trembling but firm. "I'll do anything." The chairman leaned forward, and his eyes glowed like burning coals. "Anything?" he repeated, his tone like a knife cutting through Nonso's heart. Nonso nodded, though his legs felt weak. The chairman laughed, a sound that seemed to shake the walls. "There are 3 paths," he said, holding up 3 fingers. "You must choose one." Nonso's breath caught in his throat as the chairman began. "First," the chairman said, "you can sacrifice your mother, the woman who gave you life." Nonso's heart skipped. No, I can't, he started, but the chairman raised a hand to silence him. Second, the chairman continued, you can give up your manhood, your strength, your pride, gone forever. Nonso's stomach twisted. He felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. Or, the chairman said, his voice growing darker, you can harm innocent children. Their laughter will turn to tears. Their lives taken for your gain. Nonso's knees buckled, but he didn't fall. His mind raced. Sacrifice his mother? Never. Lose his manhood? Impossible. But harming children? The thought was terrible, but his greed whispered louder than his conscience. Choose, the chairman said, his voice echoing like thunder. Nonso went back home and couldn't sleep for days. Each option haunted him like a shadow that wouldn't leave. His mother's kind face, the thought of losing his manhood, the innocent faces of children, it all spun in his head. But each time he thought of staying poor, his chest burned with anger and shame. Finally, Nonso returned to the chairman. His choice was made. I'll harm the children, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The chairman smiled, his teeth sharp like the edges of broken glass. He handed Nonso a small black bag filled with strange powders and herbs. Mix these with food, the chairman instructed. Give it to the children. Their lives will fuel your fortune. Nonso's hands shook as he took the bag. What happens after? He asked. You'll be rich, the chairman said simply, his grin spreading wider. But remember, this must be done every December when Christmas is approaching, because wealth comes with a price. Nonso held the bag tightly, the weight of his choice pressing on his chest like a heavy stone. As he walked down the hill, the wind seemed to whisper, you can never go back. Nonso waited till Christmas arrived and the town buzzed with joy. Children ran around with laughter sweet as bird songs, their faces bright like the morning sun. But while everyone was celebrating, Nonso was in his room preparing the cursed food. For the first time, he opened the small black bag from the chairman, his hands trembling. The powder inside looked ordinary, but its smell was sharp, like something burnt. He mixed it into 3 small packs of food, rice, stew, and a few sweets. As he sealed the packs, his heart pounded like a drum. When he stepped outside, his smile was wide and his voice was cheerful. Merry Christmas, he called to the children playing nearby. They ran to him, their faces glowing with excitement. Uncle Nonso brought food, one of them shouted. Nonso knelt and handed them the packs, his smile never fading. Eat well, my little ones, he said warmly. The children laughed and thanked him. Thank you, Uncle Nonso. God bless you, they chorused, their tiny hands clutching the cursed meals. Days passed, and Nonso waited, unsure of what would happen. Then it began. A wealthy businessman called him with an offer he couldn't refuse. Deals fell into his lap like ripe fruit from a tree. Soon, money poured in like rain in the wet season. Nonso's life transformed overnight. He bought a shiny black car that roared like thunder, wore clothes that sparkled like stars, and built a house so grand that everyone stopped to admire it. The town buzzed with talk of his success. Mr. Nonso is so generous, people said. He gives food to children and helps the poor. God has blessed him. But deep inside, Nonso's heart was restless. The laughter of the children haunted him at night, and their innocent voices echoed in his dreams. Yet greed whispered louder. If 3 packs gave me this much, Nonso thought, his eyes gleaming with hunger, what will 100 do? Nonso smiled to himself, already planning for the next Christmas. His hands itched for more, and his soul sank deeper into the darkness he had chosen. Christmas came again, and Nonso was ready. This time, he didn't stop at 3. He prepared 100 cursed food packs, each one carefully mixed with the powder from the chairman's black bag. His hands worked quickly, and his mind buzzed with greedy thoughts. This year, my riches will double, he whispered to himself, his eyes shining like a hunter's in the dark. Nonso chose Kingsfield Secondary School for his plan. It was a lively place filled with happy children. On the last day before Christmas, the school buzzed with excitement. Balloons hung from the windows, music played from the speakers, and the air smelled of jollof rice and fried chicken. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out. "Mr. Nonso is here!" The children ran to the gate, their laughter ringing like bells. Nonso arrived in a shiny black car that sparkled under the sun. He stepped out wearing a fine cloth, his shoes polished like mirrors. "Good afternoon, my children," he greeted warmly, his voice smooth as honey. The head teacher welcomed him with open arms. "Mr. Nonso, your kindness is unmatched," she said, clapping her hands. "You are a blessing to us." Nonso's workers began unloading bags of rice, cartons of drinks, and envelopes filled with money. The children lined up eagerly, their faces glowing with joy. "Thank you, Mr. Nonso," they shouted as they received their gifts. Nonso smiled and waved, but inside he felt nothing. His heart was as cold as the shadow of a tree on a sunny day. Days later, tragedy struck. 3 children fell sick and died mysteriously. The town mourned, their cries filling the air like the sound of broken drums. "What could have caused this?" people whispered, their faces pale with fear. Among the grieving parents were Mr. and Mrs. Zack. Though their daughter Linda was safe, the tragedy shook them deeply. That night, while the town mourned, Mrs. Zack had a dream. In her dream, she saw a thick black shadow creeping across the schools. It wrapped itself around the children, squeezing the life out of them. In the center of it all stood Mr. Nonso, smiling as he handed out gifts. His eyes were dark, like the night without stars. Mrs. Zack woke with a scream, her body drenched in sweat. "Something is wrong with that man," she cried, clutching her husband's arm. "What are you saying?" Mr. Zack asked, sitting up. "I saw him nonso," she said, her voice trembling. "His gifts, they carry evil. We must protect Linda." The next morning, the couple went to warn the other parents. "Don't let your children accept gifts from Mr. Nonso," they pleaded. "Something isn't right about him." But the parents dismissed them. "You're being too superstitious," one man said, shaking his head. Even the head teacher waved them off. Mr. Nonso has been generous to every school in this town since he became wealthy. Now that it's our turn, there's no way we're turning him away. They even told the Zacks, "If you don't want the gift, then tell your daughter, Linda, not to come to school or take the gift at the end of the year's party." Frustrated, the Zacks turned their attention to their daughter, Linda. "You must never take anything from Mr. Nonso," they warned her. "But why, Mama?" Linda asked, frowning. "Everyone else takes his gifts. Why not me?" Her parents didn't explain the dream, only repeating their warning. "Promise us, Linda, no gifts from Mr. Nonso." Linda nodded reluctantly, but in her heart, she felt her parents were being unfair. She couldn't understand why they didn't trust the kind man who made all the children happy. The other parents began to mock the Zacks. "You're raising your child in fear," they said. "Look how happy our children are with their gifts. You're just jealous of Mr. Nonso's success." Even Linda's classmates teased her. "You're missing out," they said, laughing. "When will you ever see a rich man like Mr. Nonso again?" Though the ridicule hurt, the Zacks stood firm. They refused to let Linda accept anything from Mr. Nonso. But they didn't know that their warnings would soon face the ultimate test. Linda loved school more than anything. The laughter of her friends, the games they played, and the stories they shared made her heart dance with joy. But since her parents had stopped her from attending whenever Mr. Nonso was around, her world felt smaller. One morning, as her parents left for work, an idea struck her like lightning. "I'll go to school without them knowing," she thought, a small smile creeping onto her face. She packed her school uniform into a bag and waited patiently until the house was silent. Then she slipped out, her heart pounding like a drum. At the edge of the school compound, she changed into her uniform, hiding her casual clothes in the bushes. At school, her friends greeted her with cheers and laughter. "Linda, you're back!" they shouted, pulling her into their games. For a moment, all her worries melted away. Every day after that, Linda repeated her secret plan. She would leave home, hide her uniform, and join her friends at school. Her parents didn't suspect a thing. "Linda, you're so lucky to be here," her best friend whispered one day. Linda nodded, her smile wide, but deep inside, a small voice warned her that something wasn't right. Little did she know the danger she had been shielded from was closer than she thought, waiting silently like a snake in tall grass. The day of Bright Future Academy's Christmas party was like a scene from a storybook. The classrooms were dressed in colorful balloons, ribbons, and paper chains. Music blared from the speakers, and the air smelled of sweet jollof rice and fried meat. Children ran around, their laughter bubbling like a flowing stream. Linda was among them, her face glowing with joy. She had snuck out of the house again, and nothing could spoil her excitement. Her classmates danced, clapped, and played games, filling the air with life. Then it happened. A loud voice shouted from the gate, "Mr. Nonso is here!" The children screamed in excitement, running toward the gate like a wave crashing on the shore. Nonso's shiny black car rolled into the compound, sparkling under the sunlight. He stepped out, his cloth crisp, his shoes shining, and his smile wide. "Good afternoon, my lovely children," Nonso said, his voice smooth like butter. The head teacher clapped her hands. "Welcome, Mr. Nonso. You are truly a blessing to this school." Nonso's workers began unloading bags of rice, cartons of drinks, and envelopes filled with money. The children lined up eagerly, their eyes wide with excitement. Nonso handed out the gifts one by one, patting their heads and saying, "Enjoy, my dear ones." The party roared on, the music louder, the laughter stronger. Children tore open their packs, eating and drinking with delight. But then the joy shattered. One student clutched their chest and fell to the ground. "Ah! Somebody help!" a teacher screamed, running to the child. Before anyone could react, another child collapsed, then another. Gasps and cries filled the air as panic spread like wildfire. Teachers shouted, parents rushed into the compound, and children ran in all directions. In the middle of the chaos, Linda stood frozen, her heart racing like a trap bird. She watched helplessly as more students fell, their laughter replaced by silence. The sight was too much for her. Her vision blurred, her knees gave way, and she fainted. By the end of the day, 30 lifeless bodies lay on the school grounds. The once happy party had turned into a scene of heartbreak and sorrow. Parents wailed, teachers cried, and the entire town buzzed with fear. From work, Mr. and Mrs. Zack heard what had happened, and they quickly rushed back home. However, when they entered the house, it was silent. Linda, their beloved daughter, was nowhere to be found. Mrs. Zack paced the room, her mind racing. "She should be home by now," she said, her voice trembling. Mr. Zack tried to stay calm, but his hands shook as he checked his phone for any news. "Maybe she stayed with a friend," he suggested weakly, though he didn't believe his own words. Suddenly, a knock came at their door. It was their neighbor's daughter, a quiet girl who often kept to herself. She stood at the door, her face pale. "Auntie, I need to tell you something," she said softly. Mrs. Zack leaned closer, her heart pounding. "What is it, my dear?" Linda has been sneaking out to school, the girl revealed. She hides her uniform in a bag and changes near the school gate. The words hit the Zacks like a heavy blow. Mrs. Zack gasped, clutching her chest while Mr. Zack's face darkened with worry. Without wasting a moment, they rushed out of the house, their feet moving faster than their thoughts. When they reached the school, they found chaos. Parents were wailing, their cries slicing through the air like knives. Teachers were on their knees, their faces buried in their hands. "Where is Linda?" Mrs. Zack shouted, grabbing the first person she saw. The man shook his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't know," he said. But some children were taken to the hospital. The Zacks didn't stop to ask more. They ran to the hospital, their fear growing with every step. When they arrived, they found a scene of despair. Parents crowded the entrance, begging doctors for news about their children. The Zacks searched desperately until they found Linda lying on a hospital bed. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, but she was breathing. "She's alive!" Mrs. Zack cried, falling to her knees in relief. Tears streamed down her face as she held Linda's hand. A doctor approached them, his face tired but kind. "Your daughter fainted from shock," he explained. "She didn't eat the food, so she's safe." The Zacks wept, their tears a mix of sorrow and gratitude. "Thank God she was spared," Mr. Zack whispered, his voice shaking. As they left the hospital, they saw other parents weeping over the lifeless bodies of their children. The Zacks approached them, their voices heavy with grief and anger. "We warned you," Mrs. Zack said, her words cutting through the air. "We told you not to trust Nonso, but you didn't listen." The parents could only cry, their regret hanging over them like a dark cloud. The Zacks held Linda close, vowing never to let her out of their sight again. The shadow of Nonso's evil had touched the town, leaving scars that would never fade. Back at Bright Future Academy, the once lively school was now quiet, heavy with grief. The few children who survived the tragedy stood together, their eyes wide with fear. When the police arrived, their voices broke the silence. "It was him!" one of the children cried, pointing a trembling finger at Nonso. "He gave us the food," another added, tears streaming down her face. Nonso, who had stood tall and confident just hours ago, now looked like a broken man. His hands shook and his knees buckled as he fell to the ground. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he wailed, his voice cracking. But the children didn't stop. "He did it!" they shouted, their voices growing louder. Cornered and overwhelmed, Nonso finally broke down. "It's the chairman's shrine," he cried, his words tumbling out like a confession. "I made a deal for wealth. I cursed the food." Gasps filled the air as the truth came out. The teachers stared in horror, and the parents who had gathered began to murmur angrily. The head teacher, her face pale, pointed at Nonso. "You are a monster," she screamed. The police quickly handcuffed Nonso, dragging him away as angry shouts erupted from the crowd. He must pay for this, the parents roared, their voices filled with rage and sorrow. But the townspeople weren't done. Fueled by their anger, they stormed Nonso's mansion that night. The once grand house, with its shining floors and towering gates, now felt like the lair of a beast. In the center of the mansion, they found a shrine. It was dark and eerie, with a giant wooden snake coiled around a blood-red altar. Strange objects surrounded it: candles, feathers, and a bag of black powder Nonso had used. "Burn it!" someone shouted, and the crowd didn't hesitate. Flames roared to life, consuming the shrine and the snake statue. Sparks flew into the night sky as the people chanted, "End this curse." The fire burned until nothing was left but ash. That night, the strange deaths stopped, and the heavy shadow over the town began to lift. Nonso, now a prisoner, was sentenced to life in prison. Behind bars, he sat alone, haunted by the faces of the children he had hurt. Their laughter, their bright eyes, they visited him in his dreams, turning his nights into endless torment. The town mourned deeply. Parents planted trees in the schoolyard to honor the children who were lost. The trees grew tall and strong, their branches reaching toward the sky, a reminder of lives cut short. Every Christmas after, the people of the town carried the memory of that terrible day. Parents warned their children, "Beware of gifts that seem too good to be true. Not all smiles are kind." And so, the tale of Nonso became a lesson told through generations, a warning about greed, deceit, and the cost of chasing riches at any price.